Hey, Reddit. This is a long one, so buckle up if you're into stories about insane life transformations. I never thought I'd be here telling a success story, but life is weird like that, you know? So, a little background. My name's Jake, just an ordinary guy who grew up in a nowhere town where it felt like people were either born winners or born to take the punches. Spoiler alert, I was definitely in the second group. My whole life, people like Bobby and Travis made sure I knew my place at the bottom of the social food chain. School was rough, teachers ignored me, classmates mocked me, and even strangers seemed to look right through me. And my family? Yeah, that was no picnic either. My old man, Bill, had this twisted idea of tough love, which just meant a lot of criticism and life lessons that were more like lectures on why I'd never amount to anything. I guess I internalized that message, carried it around like a weight chain to my ankle. I worked dead-end jobs and rented a rundown studio apartment that was practically falling apart. At 28, I'd officially given up on ever doing anything more than scraping by. But then, something happened that kicked things into gear. I was working a night shift at the gas station when a guy in a slick suit, I kid you not, walked in and bought a pack of smokes. We got to talking, which, honestly, doesn't happen often because most people ignore the guy behind the counter. His name was Mike, and he had this way of looking at you, like he could see things you didn't even see in yourself. Out of nowhere, he said, "You ever thought about starting something of your own?" I laughed. Yeah, sure, with all that invisible money I have lying around. But Mike didn't laugh. He just looked at me and said, "I used to be where you are now. One decision changed everything." That one line haunted me. Could I really just make one decision that would change my entire life? I spent days after that obsessing over it, going over every option I thought I didn't have. And before I knew it, I was asking around, doing research, figuring out what it'd actually take to start my own business, even if I was still a nobody in a nobody town. But things didn't go smoothly. There were some pretty dark turns coming up, ones I didn't expect at all. So, after that encounter with Mike, I got this wild idea I couldn't shake. I started brainstorming what kind of business I could even start. The thing is, I didn't have a college degree or any real skills to speak of. The only thing I was decent at was fixing things, you know, a little bit of plumbing here, some carpentry there. I figured maybe I could start a handyman service. Problem was, I didn't have a dime to my name. The bank laughed me out the door when I asked for a loan, and everyone else I turned to either said I was nuts or told me to stop dreaming and focus on my real job. Even my friend Danny, one of the only people who didn't treat me like dirt growing up, said I should reconsider. He meant well, but it stung, especially when he said, "Jake, people like us don't start businesses. It's just how it is." But I couldn't let it go. I had this fire in me that I couldn't explain, so I took the only route I could think of. I sold what little I had of value, my beat-up old car, a few electronics, even some old tools I didn't use much. I scraped together just enough to buy a basic set of tools and printed up some flyers on cheap paper. I went door to door around town, offering my services, and let me tell you, those first few weeks were brutal. Most people shut the door in my face, and the few that didn't seem suspicious, probably wondering if some broke guy like me could even fix a light bulb. But I kept at it, swallowing my pride and dealing with all the snide comments. Finally, one day, Mrs. Henderson, an elderly lady down the street, let me fix a leaky faucet. I was nervous as hell, but somehow, I did it right. She was so happy she offered me a tip, which felt like a lifeline, something small but important. That little job led to another, and then another. Soon, I was making enough to eat a decent meal every day. But then, one night, something strange happened that almost made me throw in the towel. I was locking up my tools after a job when I noticed a car slowly circling my block. At first, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, but the car kept coming back around, like it was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but my gut was telling me something was off. Later that night, as I was heading home, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there was a guy in a hoodie, face obscured, just staring at me. He didn't say a word, just stood there, watching. I felt my pulse racing, and I backed away slowly, practically sprinting home. The next morning, there was a note on my door that read, "Don't think you're better than you are, Jake." I had no idea who would leave a message like that, but it rattled me to my core. I won't lie, that note shook me. For the first time since I'd started this journey, I felt like maybe everyone was right, maybe I was getting ahead of myself. Maybe I didn't belong in this world of ambition and small business dreams. I'd always been Jake the joke, after all. What was I thinking, trying to build something out of nothing? But then I remembered that night shift at the gas station, talking to Mike and how he'd looked at me, like I was worth more than I believed. So, I swallowed my fear and kept at it. I threw myself into my work with even more grit, treating every job, no matter how small, like it was life or death. Word started spreading. People around town who would have ignored me before started coming up and asking for my card. My phone was finally buzzing with job requests instead of overdue bill reminders. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a place. People were still a little wary, maybe, but they were seeing me as Jake, the handyman, not Jake, the loser. One of my biggest breaks came out of nowhere. Travis, yeah, the same Travis who used to laugh at me in school, had a tree fall on his garage after a storm, and he was desperate for help. He must have heard I was doing jobs around town, and he showed up at my place, practically begging. It was one of those moments where the universe hands you a choice: you can kick the guy while he's down, or you can show him a side of you he never expected. So, I helped him. And I didn't cut any corners, even though I probably could have. I poured hours into fixing up that garage, and when I was done, Travis shook my hand, something I never thought I'd see in a million years. But just when things were looking up, things took another turn I didn't see coming. I was in the middle of a job one afternoon when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. The voice on the other end was low, almost a whisper. "Jake, we need to talk. Tonight, behind the old warehouse on Main." I tried to ask who it was, but they hung up. My first thought was that it was a prank, maybe someone messing with me, but it didn't sit right. The voice was too serious. And then I remembered that note on my door. That sense of dread came creeping back. But instead of backing down, I felt this strange pull to see it through. So that night, I went. The air was thick with that heavy, late summer humidity as I made my way to the old warehouse. It was one of those places no one went to anymore, abandoned and covered in graffiti, with weeds growing out of every crack. My stomach was a knot, but something inside me kept pushing me forward. I got there just as the last slivers of sunlight were disappearing behind the trees. The place was eerily quiet, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots. I was just about to turn around and leave, chalking it up to a prank, when I saw him. A man stepped out of the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face I recognized immediately. It was Bobby. Yeah, that same Bobby who'd spent years making my life hell in school. He looked different now, older, rougher around the edges, but that smug expression hadn't changed a bit. Well, Jake," he drawled, crossing his arms. "Look at you, big man around town now, huh? Got yourself a little business going." I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. "What do you want, Bobby?" He laughed, a low, unpleasant sound that echoed off the warehouse walls. "See, here's the thing. Some of us don't like seeing you acting all high and mighty. Think you're better than everyone now that you're getting a little respect? Better than you?" I shot back. "No, Bobby, I just wanted to do something with my life." That's when his smile faded. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the anger in his eyes. "You don't get it, do you? This town, it's got an order. People like you are supposed to stay at the bottom, keep to yourself. But now you're messing with that. And some of us don't like it." Before I could respond, he pulled out a wad of cash, a big one, and held it out to me. "Take this," he said, "and drop your little business. Pack up, leave town, and go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Do that, and maybe you won't end up regretting all this." I stared at the money, and for a second, I felt that old fear, that voice telling me I didn't deserve success. But then I remembered Mrs. Henderson, Danny, and even Travis, people who'd started to look at me like I was worth something. I shook my head. "I'm not taking your money, Bobby. I'm not going anywhere." Bobby's face twisted in anger, and for a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me. But instead, he just smiled, that cold, chilling smile, and backed away. "Suit yourself, Jake. But don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving me standing alone in the dark. I tried to shake it off, telling myself he was just trying to scare me, but deep down, I knew he meant every word. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease after Bobby's little chat. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning, replaying every word in my mind. What did he mean by order? Was this some kind of threat? I tried to tell myself that it was just the same old bully routine, trying to mess with me. But something felt different this time. This wasn't high school anymore. Bobby wasn't just a kid trying to pick on me for fun, he had something bigger at stake. The next day, I showed up at work like usual, trying to focus on the jobs I had lined up. But it was hard. My hands shook as I carried tools, my mind racing. Was someone watching me? I couldn't tell if I was just being paranoid or if something was actually happening, but every time a car slowed down near my house or someone lingered too long in the neighborhood, I felt like I was being hunted. And then, the worst thing happened. I was working on a roof for a local family, fixing a few shingles, when I slipped. It wasn't a big fall, but I landed hard on my leg and felt a sharp pain shoot up my side. I lay there, stunned, for a moment before the family came rushing out to help. They called an ambulance, and for the first time in years, I felt the sting of humiliation all over again. It was like the universe was reminding me that no matter how far I tried to climb, I was still that guy who couldn't catch a break. When I got to the hospital, the doctor said it was just a sprain, nothing too serious. But I had to take it easy for a few weeks, which, of course, meant no work. No income. It felt like everything I had worked for, every job I had done, was slipping through my fingers. That's when I got another call. It was from Mike, the guy who'd talked to me at the gas station months ago. He'd been following my progress, and his voice had a new urgency in it. "Jake, you've got to come see me. I've got something you need to hear." I wasn't sure what he meant, but I didn't hesitate. I knew deep down that this was the break I needed. As I limped to my car, something in my gut told me this would be the turning point, the moment I'd either sink or swim. But as I pulled up to Mike's office, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Bobby's car was parked out front. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Bobby's car parked outside Mike's office. My stomach dropped. What the hell was he doing here? I had no idea what kind of game he was playing, but the last time I saw him, he was practically threatening me. The sense of dread that had been building up over the past few days intensified, and I hesitated for a moment before getting out of the car. I hobbled inside, trying to shake off the unease. Mike's office wasn't fancy, just a small, quiet place tucked in the corner of a strip mall, but it was a step up from where I was living. Mike was leaning back in his chair when I walked in, and his eyes immediately locked onto me, a knowing look on his face. "Jake," he said, his tone calm but serious. "We need to talk." Before I could ask why Bobby was there, Mike gestured to the chair across from him. sit down. I've been hearing some things. Things I think you need to know. I sat down, still confused, and glanced over at Bobby, who was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his face unreadable. He didn't speak, just watched me with that same cold, calculating stare that made my skin crawl. Mike took a deep breath, then leaned forward. You're not just building a business, Jake. You're shaking up the status quo. And not everyone likes that. Bobby here, he nodded to Bobby, who didn't even flinch at being singled out. Bobby and his associates, let's call them, have a lot invested in keeping things just the way they are. People like you, with dreams and ambition, don't fit into their plans. They don't like competition. I could feel my pulse quickening as Mike's words sank in. Bobby wasn't just a bully from my past. He was part of something bigger, something far more dangerous than I'd ever realized. And I had unwittingly pissed them off by starting my business. Mike, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean, associates? I asked, my voice tight with panic. Mike sighed and looked over at Bobby. Let's just say Bobby isn't working alone. He's part of a group that controls a lot of the businesses in this town. They've been doing things the same way for years, and they don't take kindly to outsiders, especially ones that might rock the boat. You, Jake, you've got potential, but that's a threat to them. They don't want you around. My mind was spinning. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Bobby had been a jerk all these years, but now it sounded like he was part of something far more sinister. So what, you're telling me they're going to shut me down? Mike didn't sugarcoat it. They'll try. They've got resources. They've got connections. And if they can't scare you into leaving, they'll find another way. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was no longer just a guy trying to get by. I was a threat to people who had real power. Jake, Mike said, his voice softer now, this isn't just about business. It's about survival. You have to make a choice, either you give in and leave, or you fight back and prepare for what's coming. I didn't know what to say. What the hell was I supposed to do? I'd worked so damn hard just to get a foothold, and now it felt like everything I'd built was on the verge of being ripped away from me. Before I could respond, Bobby stepped forward, his voice low but firm. Listen, Jake. I tried to warn you. It doesn't have to be like this. Just take the money, pack up, and leave. You're in way over your head. I stared at Bobby, then at Mike, feeling the weight of my choices pressing down on me. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. This was a fight for everything I had, my future, my independence, my dignity. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. I stood there, staring at Bobby and Mike, and felt something inside me snap. My whole life, I'd been the guy who let others call the shots. The one who took the punches and backed down. But not anymore. I turned to Mike, my voice steady but fierce. I'm not running, Mike. I'm not backing down. Not this time. Mike studied me for a long moment, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. You sure about that? Because once you make this decision, there's no going back. I nodded, feeling the fire rise in me. I'm sure. Bobby let out a low chuckle, clearly unconvinced. You're a damn fool, Jake. You don't know what you're dealing with. These guys don't just push people around. They destroy them. I didn't care. I was done being scared. Let them try. Mike sighed and ran a hand through his hair. All right, then. You're in this, and there's no turning back. But you need to be prepared for what's coming. Bobby's not just some thug, Jake. He's part of a bigger network. These people, they've got connections everywhere. They can make your life hell. My mind was racing, but I kept my voice calm. What do I need to do? Mike stood up, walking over to a filing cabinet and pulling out a stack of papers. He slammed them onto the desk in front of me. This is everything I've got on Bobby's crew. Their names, their businesses, their connections. If you want to fight back, this is your ammo. I reached for the papers, my hands trembling slightly as I flipped through the files. It was a lot to process, but the more I saw, the more I realized that Mike was right. Bobby wasn't just a bully anymore. He was part of something much bigger, something that controlled this town. And I had no idea what I'd just stepped into. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. Before I could say anything, Mike leaned in, his voice serious. You're going to need help. You can't take them on alone. I've got a guy who can help you with this, but you need to be careful. If you go public with this, they'll come after you. They won't hesitate. I looked at Mike, unsure what to say. I wasn't exactly in the position to trust anyone, especially someone like Bobby. But I had no choice. I couldn't just fold. All right, I said, determination setting in. Let's do this. Mike nodded, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a business card, handing it to me. This is Kyle. He's got experience dealing with these kinds of people. You need him on your side. I stared at the card for a moment, then pocketed it. Thanks, Mike. I'll call him. As I walked out of the office, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of clarity. My whole life, I'd been running from the bullies, from the people who told me I wasn't good enough. But now? I was done running. It was time to make a stand. And whatever came next, I was ready. The next few days felt like I was living in a haze. I wasn't sleeping well, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when Bobby and his crew would come for me. The feeling of being hunted didn't let up. But I pushed it aside. I had bigger things to focus on now. I kept my business going, despite the fear. I made a few calls, lined up a couple of small jobs, and somehow, I felt a little bit in control again. But all the while, I couldn't stop thinking about the file Mike had given me. The names, the connections, it was like looking at a spider's web of corruption, and I was caught right in the center of it. I decided it was time to meet Kyle. I called the number Mike had given me, and when I heard Kyle's gravelly voice on the other end, I felt a flicker of hope. He agreed to meet me at a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one would ask questions. I didn't know what to expect, but at this point, I didn't have many options. I got there early, sitting in a corner booth, nervously scanning the room. The place was quiet, the kind of diner that smelled like grease and nostalgia. The waitress was giving me odd looks as I kept checking the door. It was just a meeting, but it felt like the first step into a world I wasn't sure I could handle. When Kyle walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He wasn't some tough-looking guy like I expected. He was in his 30s, maybe, wearing a worn leather jacket and jeans, his hair a little messy but his eyes sharp. He had a kind of quiet intensity about him, the kind of person you wouldn't mess with, but also someone you didn't want to be on the wrong side of. He slid into the booth across from me, nodding in greeting. Jake? Yeah, I said, my voice a little unsteady. You Mike's guy? He shrugged, then gave me a quick look. Depends on how you want to play it. I blinked. I'm here because I need help. I'm being targeted by a group in this town. They've got their hands in everything, and they don't like the fact that I'm trying to build something. Kyle didn't seem surprised. In fact, he almost seemed like he was expecting it. Bobby's crew, right? I've heard rumors about them. They've been around a long time, Jake. And they don't take kindly to anyone stepping on their toes. But you're smart to come to me. I stared at him, trying to understand what he was getting at. Why should I trust you? Kyle leaned in, his voice low. Because I've been where you are. I've fought these guys before. They're not invincible, but they've got power. Power that can make your life hell if you're not careful. But you, Jake, you're not alone in this anymore. I can help you get the leverage you need to fight back. His words hit me like a lightning bolt. I wasn't alone. I didn't have to fight this battle by myself. But the next question was even bigger than that. What's the catch? I asked, already knowing there had to be one. Kyle gave a tight smile. The catch is simple, you're going to have to get your hands dirty. You want to take down Bobby and his crew, you've got to play by their rules. And that means getting into their world. I wasn't sure what he meant by their world, but I knew what I had to do. If I was going to survive this, I couldn't play by the same old rules anymore. It was time to step into the dark side of things. All right, I said, my voice firm now. Let's do it. Kyle's smile deepened, but there was no warmth in it. Good. You've got guts, Jake. That's what you'll need for what comes next. I sat back, trying to process everything. I had no clue what I was getting myself into, but there was no turning back now. The reality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was about to enter a world of corruption, power, and danger. And there was no way out. Kyle slid a folder across the table toward me. This is everything I've got on Bobby's crew. The businesses they control, their money laundering operations, everything. But here's the thing, this is only part of the picture. If you want to take them down, you've got to get your hands on more information. You've got to get into their inner circle. I picked up the folder, my hands slightly trembling. It wasn't just about standing up to Bobby anymore. This was about destroying everything he and his crew had built. And that meant doing things I'd never imagined I'd be capable of. I looked at Kyle, trying to make sense of what he was saying. And how the hell am I supposed to get into their inner circle? I'm not exactly well connected. Kyle leaned back, arms crossed. That's where you come in. You've got a reputation now, Jake. People know who you are. They know you're building something, and that makes you a threat to Bobby. If you play your cards right, you can get close to him, get in on some of the deals. And once you're in, we'll make sure you get what you need. I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me. This was no longer just about survival, it was about playing a dangerous game. A game that could cost me everything if I wasn't careful. But how do I get close to him? I asked, my mind racing. I don't know how to play their game. I'm not one of them. Kyle grinned, but it wasn't a friendly grin. You'll learn. Everyone's got a price, Jake. Bobby and his crew, they're no different. You find out what they want, you make yourself valuable to them, and you'll get your foot in the door. Then we take it from there. I wasn't sure how to feel. The whole thing sounded insane, like something out of a movie. But the reality was clear, if I didn't do this, I'd never get out from under Bobby's shadow. I'd never build anything. And I'd always be that guy who got pushed around. I had no choice. All right, I said, my voice cold with determination. Let's do it. Kyle nodded, a glint of approval in his eyes. Good. But remember, Jake, this isn't just about the business anymore. It's about winning, and that means doing whatever it takes. With that, the conversation ended, and I left the diner with a sense of finality. My life had just taken a sharp turn into the unknown, and there was no telling what was waiting for me on the other side. But one thing was certain, I was in this for the long haul. And I wasn't going to let Bobby and his crew destroy everything I'd worked for. As I drove home, the weight of what I was about to do settled heavily on my shoulders. I wasn't just fighting for my business anymore. I was fighting for my life. And no matter what, I wasn't going down without a fight. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, whispers, and constant vigilance. Kyle wasn't kidding when he said I had to get my hands dirty. I did everything I could to get myself closer to Bobby's circle. I played the role of the eager entrepreneur, ready to strike deals and make connections, all while keeping my eyes peeled for any cracks in Bobby's operation. I started showing up at the places where Bobby and his crew did business. A little dive bar downtown, a nondescript office building where shady transactions were made in the back rooms, and the kind of greasy mechanic shops that hid more than just car parts. Everywhere I went, I kept my head down, acted like I belonged, and let the wheels of the underworld turn around me. It wasn't long before I caught Bobby's eye. At first, it was subtle. A passing nod when I showed up at the bar. A handshake when we crossed paths at a local event. But then, one night, things took a darker turn. I was at that same dive bar again, nursing a cheap beer, scanning the room for anything useful. Bobby and his crew were gathered in a back booth, laughing and talking like they didn't have a care in the world. I could hear fragments of their conversation, nothing too incriminating, but enough to make me wonder what kind of stuff they were really involved in. Then, I saw it. A briefcase sitting on the table in front of Bobby. It wasn't locked, but it wasn't open either. My heart began to race. If I could get a look inside that case, maybe I'd find something I could use to bring him down. But before I could make a move, Bobby's eyes landed on me across the room. For a moment, I froze, but then I forced myself to stand and walk toward their table. I kept my expression neutral, pretending I wasn't sweating bullets. "Jake," Bobby said with a smirk. "What's going on, man?" I smiled, trying to sound casual. "Not much. Just thought I'd stop by, see what's going on with you guys." Bobby motioned for me to sit. "Sure, have a drink. We were just talking about business." I sat down, trying to appear relaxed, but inside I was panicking. The briefcase was so close. If I could just distract them for a few minutes, maybe I could get a peek. But I had to play it cool. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. We chatted for a while, the conversation drifting from business to sports to random nonsense. But all I could think about was that damn briefcase. Every time one of Bobby's men shifted or laughed, I got the feeling they were just waiting for me to screw up. Then, finally, the moment came. Bobby stood up to make a phone call, stepping away from the table for a few minutes. The second he was out of earshot, one of his guys, a big guy with a scar across his cheek, stood up and went to the bar. It was my chance. I didn't even think twice. I leaned forward, subtly sliding the briefcase closer to me. My pulse was hammering in my ears as I cracked it open just a little. Inside, I saw stacks of cash, documents I couldn't make sense of, and something that made my stomach lurch, a black and white photo of a man I didn't recognize, with a note attached, "Handle it." The words were scrawled in messy handwriting. The briefcase snapped shut just as the scarred guy came back to the table, his eyes narrowing when he saw what I was doing. My heart stopped. "Everything all right?" he growled. I quickly backed off, sitting up straighter and acting casual. "Yeah, just looking at the weather outside." He didn't seem convinced, but he didn't say anything else. Instead, he just gave me a sharp look and sat back down. My stomach churned as I tried to act normal, though I was already planning my next move in my head. That photo was a big deal, maybe bigger than I realized. It could be the leverage I needed. Bobby came back a minute later, none the wiser, and the rest of the night passed without incident. But the seed had been planted. I had something now. Something that could give me the edge I needed to take Bobby and his crew down. As I left the bar that night, I felt the weight of the photo in my pocket like a ticking time bomb. Whatever Bobby was mixed up in, it was worse than I thought. And I was about to dive headfirst into a game I might not be able to control. But I was committed now. There was no turning back. The next few days felt like walking on a tightrope. I couldn't stop thinking about the photo I'd found in the briefcase. The man in the picture, whoever he was, seemed important. And the note, the "handle it" message, sent a chill down my spine. I had no idea what it meant, but I had a feeling it was something big. Something dangerous. I went back to my apartment and studied the photo under a dim light. I couldn't recognize the man, but there was something about him that felt familiar. Maybe I had seen him around town before, or maybe it was just my imagination running wild. Either way, it wasn't enough to make any sense of what I was dealing with. I needed answers. That's when I called Kyle. I wasn't sure what he could do, but he was the only person who seemed to have any knowledge of Bobby's world. If anyone could help me figure out what the hell was going on, it was him. I dialed his number, my heart racing as the phone rang. When Kyle picked up, his voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying tension in it. "Jake, what's up?" "I need your help," I said, my voice tight. "I found something. A photo in Bobby's briefcase. There's a guy in it, and a note that says, 'Handle it.' I don't know what it means, but I think it's important. I need to know who this guy is." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought Kyle might hang up. But then he spoke. "That's bad, Jake. Real bad." "Why? Who is he?" Kyle hesitated again. "I'm not sure. But I've got a bad feeling about this. If Bobby's got a photo like that, it's probably someone who's already in the ground. And if they're telling him to handle it, that means there's something serious going on behind the scenes. You need to be careful." I felt a sick knot twist in my stomach. "You think he's dead?" "Probably," Kyle replied. "Bobby doesn't mess around with threats. If this guy's a liability, they'll deal with him. And if you're poking around, looking into it, they'll see you as a threat too." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was a lot to take in. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I was that I needed to find out who this guy was. I couldn't just walk away now. "I don't care. I need to know," I said, my voice resolute. "You're the one who got me into this mess, Kyle. You can't just leave me hanging now." There was another pause, and then Kyle finally spoke. All right. I've got a contact. He's a guy I trust, someone who knows the ins and outs of this town. He's got information on people like this. I'll set up a meeting for you, but you've got to be careful. If this thing goes south, it could get ugly." "I'm used to ugly," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Just make it happen." Kyle agreed to the plan, and we ended the call. I sat there for a long while, staring at the photo in my hands, knowing that what I was about to do could change everything. But I didn't have a choice anymore. I was in too deep. A few days later, I met Kyle's contact in a secluded part of town. It was a quiet, run-down part of the city where the air smelled like rot and decay. The kind of place where you didn't ask questions, because you didn't want to hear the answers. The contact was a man named Travis. He was tall, with a scar that ran down his left cheek, and a cold, calculating look in his eyes. I knew right away that he wasn't someone you could mess with. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You Jake?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound confident. He looked at the photo in my hand, then back at me. "You got balls, I'll give you that. But you don't want to be poking around in Bobby's business, trust me." "I need to know who this guy is," I said, pushing the photo toward him. "This guy in the picture. Bobby's got him in his hands, and I need to know what the hell's going on." Travis didn't take the photo right away. Instead, he leaned in close, his eyes narrowing. "This is bigger than you think, Jake. This guy you're asking about? He was part of a crew that Bobby wiped out a few years ago. They were trouble. They got in his way. And Bobby? He doesn't leave loose ends. I felt a chill run down my spine. So, he's dead? Yeah. Long time ago. But Bobby keeps the photo as a reminder. A warning to anyone who thinks they can take him on. I suddenly felt small, like I had no idea what I was really up against. But there was no turning back now. I had to finish this. Is there anything else I need to know? I asked, my voice a little shakier than I wanted it to be. Travis stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. Just one thing, Jake. You're getting in way over your head. Bobby doesn't just kill people. He makes them disappear. You'll never see it coming. The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. But despite the fear crawling up my spine, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Bobby destroy me. Not this time. I left Travis with more questions than answers, but at least now I knew what I was dealing with. Bobby was ruthless, and the people who got in his way didn't just disappear, they were erased. And I was starting to wonder if I was about to be next. I spent the next few days on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder. The world around me had shifted, and I was no longer just a guy trying to make it in the business world. I was a player in a deadly game, where every step I took could be my last. Every conversation I had, every deal I tried to make, felt like a calculated risk. Bobby was watching, and the more I dug, the more I realized I had no idea how deep this thing ran. The photo, the man Bobby had erased, had become an obsession. I couldn't get the image of him out of my head, and I knew there was something important I was missing. Something I had to figure out before it was too late. I decided to keep pressing. I couldn't back down now, not after everything that had happened. But I knew I needed a different approach, one that would get me closer to Bobby without drawing too much attention. I couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. That's when I made my first real misstep. I showed up at Bobby's usual hangout, a cigar lounge he frequented with his top lieutenants. I'd been there a few times before, always keeping to myself, but this time, I was determined to get closer. I had to get inside his head, figure out his next move, and gain his trust. I wasn't planning to stir up trouble, but I had a gut feeling I needed to be there. I sat at the bar, ordering a drink, trying to act casual as I scanned the room. Bobby was there, as usual, surrounded by his usual crew, Kyle, the big guy with the scar, and a few others I recognized but didn't know by name. They were in the back corner, laughing, talking business, probably about some shady deal that was making them more money than I could imagine. But then something unexpected happened. As I watched them, my gaze shifted to the doorway, where a man entered who wasn't part of the usual crowd. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, and his face was obscured by a hat. He moved quickly, scanning the room before heading straight toward Bobby's table. I couldn't help myself, I had to know who this guy was. I stood up and moved closer, trying to be as discreet as possible, but I could feel the eyes of Bobby's crew on me. The tension in the air was palpable. I got close enough to overhear their conversation, just barely catching the tail end of it. "I told you," the man said, his voice low and steady, "it's time to move. We can't let this drag on any longer. Bobby's getting too comfortable." I froze, my heart racing. Who was this guy, and why was he talking like he was in charge? I'd heard whispers of people in Bobby's circle who weren't part of the main crew, people who worked behind the scenes, pulling strings without anyone knowing. But this guy, whoever he was, sounded like he was a bigger deal than I thought. Bobby didn't seem too pleased. "You're asking me to move too fast," he said, his tone sharp. "We don't do things on your timeline. We do things on mine." The man didn't back down. "It's not about your timeline, Bobby. It's about survival. We both know how this ends if we don't act first." I couldn't hear the rest of the conversation, but my mind was spinning. This was it. This was the clue I'd been waiting for. Whoever this man was, he knew something. He knew things about Bobby that I didn't. And if I could get close to him, if I could figure out what he was planning, it might be the key to everything. But before I could make my move, Bobby's eyes flicked in my direction. The moment our gazes met, I felt a surge of panic. I didn't know if he'd recognized me, or if it was just my nerves getting the best of me, but I had a feeling that my time here had just come to an end. I quickly turned and left, my heart pounding in my chest. But just as I reached the door, I heard Bobby's voice, low and menacing, calling my name. Jake. I froze, my stomach dropping to my feet. There was no way out now. I was already too deep in. Come back here, he said, his voice calm but laced with an edge. We need to talk. I turned slowly, forcing my legs to move even though I felt like I might collapse. As I made my way back to the table, I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on me, the tension in the air so thick I could almost taste it. When I reached the table, Bobby didn't even look at me at first. He was staring at the man who had just walked in, the one who had spoken of moving fast. You know who this is? Bobby asked, his voice eerily casual, though I could see the barely contained fury in his eyes. I swallowed hard. No, I don't. Bobby turned his gaze to me, his eyes narrowing. This is Carl, he said, as if that explained everything. You don't need to know anything more than that. I didn't have time to ask any more questions. Carl didn't seem like the type of guy you could ask questions to without paying a price. Instead, I kept my mouth shut, my heart still racing, as Bobby waved me off. Don't come back here again without an invitation, Jake. Understand? I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I could feel my legs shaking, but I didn't show it. I had to play this cool. No more mistakes. As I walked out, I couldn't help but wonder, who the hell was Carl, and why did Bobby seem so afraid of him? This was bigger than I realized, and I had no idea where it was going to lead. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to back down now. The game had changed, and I was in the middle of it. The days after that encounter at the cigar lounge were a blur. The whole situation had spiraled out of control so quickly that I couldn't keep track of the moves I was making. Bobby, Carl, and the whole crew, they were all part of a world that was darker and more dangerous than I ever imagined. And no matter how hard I tried to stay one step ahead, I felt like I was always falling further behind. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. We can't let this drag on any longer. What was it that Carl wanted to move on? And why was Bobby so worried about survival? The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like something big was brewing behind the scenes. Something that could blow up in everyone's face, including mine. But I couldn't just sit on the sidelines anymore. I needed to take control. The problem was, I had no idea where to start. I couldn't exactly walk up to Bobby and ask him for a clearer explanation, not after the cold stare he gave me. And I didn't trust anyone around him, not after what happened to that guy in the photo. The whole thing made me paranoid, like everyone was playing a part in a game I didn't understand. That's when I decided to try something else. I needed to find out more about Carl. I couldn't just ignore him. If he was someone Bobby listened to, then he had to have power. I didn't know what kind of power he had, but I was going to find out. I reached out to a contact from my past. Her name was Emma, and she ran a bar downtown. It wasn't the kind of place that would make your list of must-visit hotspots, but it was the kind of place where you could overhear things that weren't meant for anyone else. Emma was connected, and she always knew the latest gossip, whether it was about local businesses or people like Bobby and Carl. I met her late at night, under the flickering neon sign of the bar. She had a drink in her hand, and her eyes were already sharp, like she knew why I was there before I even opened my mouth. "You're digging too deep, Jake," Emma said, her tone almost like a warning. "You're poking around in things that aren't your business." "I need to know who Carl is," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He was at the lounge with Bobby." They seemed tense. Emma laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made you feel like you were being judged for something you hadn't even done yet. "Carl's not someone you want to mess with," she said, her voice low, like she was letting me in on some dangerous secret. "He's been around a lot longer than Bobby. Hell, he's been around longer than most of this town. He's not just a criminal, he's the criminal. You've heard of the East Side Syndicate, right?" I nodded, though I didn't really know much about it. I'd heard rumors about gangs and underground businesses, but I wasn't a part of that world. I had my own hustle, until Bobby dragged me into his. "The syndicate runs things," Emma continued, her gaze shifting as she leaned in closer. "Carl's one of their top guys. The kind of guy who deals with the real dirty work. He makes problems disappear, just like Bobby. But Carl's colder. He's got connections no one else can touch. People fear him, even Bobby." This hit me harder than I expected. The syndicate wasn't just a local gang. It was an empire. And Carl? He wasn't just a thug in Bobby's crew. He was the man behind the curtain, pulling the strings without anyone knowing. "Why does Bobby even deal with him?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "I thought Bobby was the one in charge." Emma gave me a sharp look. "Bobby's got ambition, but Carl's got history. And history's a dangerous thing when you're trying to get to the top. You don't cross someone like Carl. You don't challenge him, and you don't ask too many questions." I sat back, processing what she said. My mind was racing. I had thought I could handle Bobby and his crew. But Carl? He was something else entirely. "What happens if I keep digging into this?" I asked, suddenly unsure if I was ready for the consequences. Emma's eyes darkened, and she took a long drink from her glass before answering. "You won't get the answers you want. All you'll get is a bullet in the back of your head. That's how this world works. People like Carl don't let their secrets slip. If he knows you're onto him, you'll be gone before you even know it." I could feel the weight of her words pressing down on me, but something in me refused to back down. I wasn't just going to let Carl and Bobby win. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I couldn't let fear control me. Not anymore. "I have to know," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm in too deep, Emma. I don't have a choice." Emma shook her head. "You've got a choice. You always have a choice. But if you keep going down this road, Jake, there's no coming back. No one comes out of this clean." I didn't have time to process her warning. As I left the bar, I felt the weight of her words hanging in the air. But there was no turning back now. I was already too far gone. And if I didn't finish what I started, I'd be swallowed whole by a world I didn't understand. That night, I went back to my apartment, sitting in the darkness, staring at the photo once more. I knew I wasn't just fighting for respect anymore. This wasn't about the business. It wasn't about proving myself. It was about survival. And suddenly, the photo of the dead man in Bobby's briefcase felt like a warning, a sign that if I didn't get the answers soon, I would be next. The next few days felt like a waking nightmare. I was running on adrenaline, constantly on edge, my mind spinning with every new piece of information I uncovered. Every move I made felt like I was one step away from either success or disaster. And all the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that Carl and Bobby were watching me, waiting for me to slip up. I couldn't stop thinking about Emma's warning. You won't get the answers you want. All you'll get is a bullet in the back of your head. Her words echoed in my mind as I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone screen. The constant buzzing of my inbox and text messages made me jump every time, like they were all part of some bigger trap. I needed answers. But more importantly, I needed leverage. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to sit around and wait to get caught up in whatever game Carl and Bobby were playing. I had to take control, push the boundaries, and find a way to use what I knew to my advantage. And I had a plan, one that could either make me a player in this dangerous world or get me killed. I went back to the cigar lounge. This time, I wasn't there to blend in or listen from the shadows. I was going to confront Bobby. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. I couldn't afford to be afraid anymore. It was now or never. When I walked in, the air was thick with smoke, and the familiar faces of Bobby's crew were scattered around the room. Bobby wasn't there yet, but I could tell from the way his guys were sitting, that they were on edge. They had the look of men who were expecting trouble, but weren't sure where it would come from. I made my way to the bar, ordered a drink, and waited. My hands were shaking, but I tried not to let it show. I needed to keep my cool. I needed to make Bobby think I had the upper hand. A few minutes later, Bobby strolled in, his usual confident swagger making the room shift in his direction. But this time, he didn't seem as relaxed as he usually did. He walked straight up to me without missing a beat, his eyes narrowing. "You've got a lot of guts, Jake," he said, his voice low, almost too casual. It made my skin crawl. "I didn't expect to see you here again after last time." "I've got more than guts, Bobby," I said, trying to match his tone. "I've got information. And I think you'll want to hear it." Bobby's eyebrows shot up. He motioned for his crew to give us some space, and the tension in the room grew thick. I could feel every set of eyes on me, but I kept my gaze fixed on Bobby. "Information," he repeated, stepping closer. "What kind of information?" I took a deep breath. This was it. There was no turning back now. "I know about Carl," I said. "And I know about the syndicate. I know what you're involved in, Bobby. And I know you're scared of Carl." Bobby's expression didn't change, but I could see the slightest twitch in his jaw. It was a small crack in the armor he'd been wearing, and I could tell it was enough to rattle him. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Jake," Bobby said, his voice suddenly cold. "You don't know anything about Carl, and you sure as hell don't know anything about what I'm doing." "Oh, I know more than you think," I shot back. "I know about the photo. The one you've been hiding. I know about the man who's gone missing. I know that the syndicate isn't just some street gang. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than me. And it's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down." For a moment, Bobby didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching me, like he was trying to decide whether or not to trust me, or whether he should kill me right there. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but laced with threat. "You're making a huge mistake, Jake. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I wasn't backing down. I had him in a corner now. If he wanted to silence me, he would have to do it now, or risk me going public with everything I knew. "I'm not afraid of you, Bobby," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "And I'm not afraid of Carl. But I know this, if we don't deal with this now, it's going to destroy everything. I'm giving you a chance to take control, Bobby. You don't have to be scared of Carl. You just need to make the right move." For a long, agonizing moment, we stared at each other. The room had gone silent, and I could feel every breath, every heartbeat. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump, not knowing if I'd soar or crash. Then, Bobby did something unexpected. He smiled. A slow, calculating smile that sent a chill down my spine. "You think you've got me figured out, don't you?" he said, his voice dark with amusement. "But you're wrong. You're really wrong." Before I could react, Bobby grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back of the lounge. His grip was tight, unyielding. I knew he wasn't just going to let me walk away this time. As he shoved me into a small back room, I heard the unmistakable click of a door locking behind us. The smile on Bobby's face was gone, replaced by something far worse. "You want to play this game, Jake?" he said, his tone suddenly deadly. "Then let's see how far you're willing to go." I swallowed hard, realizing I had just stepped into something much darker than I had ever imagined. The door clicked shut behind me with a finality that made my heart race. Bobby's grip on my arm tightened as he pushed me further into the dimly lit back room. The walls were lined with old, dusty shelves filled with odds and ends, mostly boxes, some with faded labels, others just stacked haphazardly. It smelled like stale cigar smoke and old leather, and the air felt thick, like it was closing in on me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I could feel the tension building between us, the weight of the situation settling like a dark cloud. I didn't know what Bobby was planning, but I could tell he wasn't just going to let me walk out of there. This wasn't just a conversation anymore, it was a standoff. "Sit down," Bobby commanded, pointing to a worn-out chair in the corner. He didn't let go of my arm until I obeyed, and I reluctantly sat. I didn't want to show any weakness, but the way he was acting, like he had control of everything, made it hard to think clearly. He paced around the room, his boots echoing against the concrete floor with every step. His eyes were fixed on me, his expression unreadable, but there was something dangerous about the way he moved. It was like he was trying to size me up, trying to figure out what my next move would be. "I don't know what the hell you think you're doing, Jake," Bobby finally spoke, his voice low and sharp. "But you're playing a game you can't win. You've been poking your nose into things that don't concern you, and now you're forcing my hand. I gave you a chance to walk away, but now," he paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Now, you're gonna see how far you're willing to go to survive." My stomach twisted in knots. I was in over my head, and I knew it. But I wasn't ready to give up. I wasn't going to let Bobby or Carl intimidate me. Not now, not when I was so close to everything I'd been working toward. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "And I'm not backing down. If you think you can scare me into silence, you're wrong. I've already come too far." Bobby stopped pacing and fixed me with a hard stare. For a second, I thought he might strike me, but then he just shook his head, his lips curling into a sneer. "You think you've got the upper hand, don't you?" he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You've been playing this game for weeks, thinking you're smarter than everyone else. But let me tell you something, Jake, there's always someone smarter. And right now, that someone is me." He stepped closer, his face inches from mine. I could smell the whiskey on his breath, feel the heat radiating off his body. He was so close I could almost taste the danger. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Bobby continued, his voice lowering even more. "Carl, he's not just some guy you can intimidate or outsmart. He's got people everywhere, people who will make you disappear without a second thought. And as for me," he leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not afraid to use you as bait if it means keeping my position. I don't need you alive, Jake. I just need you to be quiet." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Bobby wasn't just a thug in a crew. He was playing a game of power, one where I was nothing but a pawn. But I wasn't about to let him control me. Not now. Not ever. I stood up abruptly, brushing off the cold sweat that had formed on the back of my neck. "If you think I'm just going to sit here and let you threaten me, you've got another thing coming." Bobby's expression changed in an instant, his eyes flashing with a dangerous intensity. He took a step back, but the tension between us didn't lessen. It only seemed to grow. "You're playing a dangerous game, Jake," Bobby warned, his voice deadly serious now. "One that you're not going to win. You think you can outsmart me, but you're not even on the same level." I didn't flinch. I knew I was walking a tightrope, and I couldn't afford to lose my balance now. I had to keep pressing, keep pushing, keep showing Bobby that I wasn't going to back down. "I don't need to outsmart you," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through my veins. I just need to survive. And if that means taking down your little empire piece by piece, then so be it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stared at each other, the tension in the room palpable. I could feel the weight of his gaze, but I didn't look away. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me scared. Finally, Bobby let out a long breath, like he was weighing his options. He turned his back to me, his shoulders tense. "I could kill you right now," he muttered, almost to himself. "No one would even blink. But for some reason, I'm not. And I don't know if that's because I'm feeling generous, or because you've got some kind of leverage I don't know about." I didn't say anything. I just watched him, trying to gauge his next move. Bobby turned back to face me, his expression hardening once again. "You've got one chance to walk away, Jake. If you keep digging into this, if you keep poking around in things that aren't your business, there's no coming back. And I'm not the one you should be worried about. Carl? He's the one who'll make you disappear." I held my ground. "I don't need your threats, Bobby. And I don't need Carl. I'm not going anywhere. I'm in this now." Bobby's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dangerous passing through them. "Then get ready to lose everything you've worked for. Because it's all coming down, and you're going to be the first to fall." He didn't say anything else after that. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the dark, my thoughts racing. The warning was clear, I was in way deeper than I had ever imagined. But there was no turning back now. The game was on, and I was about to find out just how far I was willing to go to survive. I wasn't just fighting for respect anymore. I was fighting for my life.